I never intended to become wealthy. Growing up in rural Michigan, the son of a factory worker and a waitress, my aspirations were modest: a steady job, a comfortable home, perhaps enough savings to take the occasional vacation. Wealth of the magnitude I eventually accumulated was beyond my imagination. But life has a way of surprising you, both in what it gives and what it takes away. By my 70th birthday, I had amassed a fortune of just over $25 million, not through inheritance or lottery winnings, but through decades of calculated risks, 18-hour workdays, and sacrificing time I should have spent with my family. My commercial real estate development company, Walsh Properties, had grown from a small-time operation buying and renovating dilapidated apartment buildings in Detroit to a regional powerhouse with properties across the Midwest. My wife, Eleanor, had been by my side for most of that journey. We met in college. She was studying art history. I was barely maintaining a C average in business administration while working nights at a warehouse. She believed in me when no one else did, took a chance on me when I was nothing but ambition and rough edges. For 41 years, she was my anchor, my compass, my home. When pancreatic cancer took her 5 years ago, something inside me broke. The fortune I'd built seemed suddenly meaningless without her to share it. Our sprawling lakeside home in Grosse Pointe felt cavernous, empty of her laughter and the scent of her gardenia perfume. The future I'd envisioned, retirement, travel, grandchildren on my knee, shattered into fragments I couldn't reassemble. In the aftermath of Eleanor's death, I retreated into myself, throwing what energy I had left into the business, working even when there was no financial need. My relationship with our 3 children, already strained by years of absentee parenting, deteriorated further. They reached out at first, invitations to dinners, holidays, grandchildren's birthday parties, but my responses were perfunctory when they came at all. Gradually, the invitations became less frequent, eventually limited to obligatory Christmas gatherings that felt more like business meetings than family celebrations. It was during this period of grief and isolation that I began to notice troubling patterns in my children's behavior. Small things at first, pointed questions about my estate planning, suggestions that I simplify my finances by adding them to my accounts, concerned comments about my ability to manage my affairs at my advanced age. I was grieving, not senile, but they spoke to me as if I were a child, exchanging knowing glances when they thought I wasn't looking. Thomas, my eldest at 45, was the most transparent. A moderately successful investment banker with a taste for luxury that exceeded his income, he'd approached me multiple times for loans to cover everything from his Maserati's lease payments to his son's private school tuition. The loans were never repaid, and each time the amounts grew larger. "Dad, have you considered downsizing?" he asked during one of our rare dinners together at his country club in Birmingham. "That house is far too large for one person, and the maintenance must be becoming burdensome. I know a fantastic retirement community in Bloomfield Hills, very exclusive, excellent facilities." "I'm fine in my home, Thomas," I replied, cutting into my overpriced steak. "The housekeeper comes 3 times a week, and the landscaping service handles the grounds." "Of course, but it's not just about maintenance. It's about having people around, a community." He leaned forward, lowering his voice. "And frankly, Dad, it would free up a significant amount of capital. The lake house must be worth, what, 4-5 million in today's market?" I met his gaze steadily. "I haven't had it appraised recently." He nodded, trying to appear casual as he sipped his bourbon. "Just something to consider. At your age, liquidity might be more valuable than equity tied up in real estate. At my age, as if 75 meant I had one foot in the grave and couldn't be trusted to manage my own affairs." My daughter, Rebecca, was subtler but no less concerning. A corporate attorney with a sharp mind and sharper tongue, she began sending me articles about dementia and cognitive decline, followed by information about the importance of comprehensive estate planning. "It's not about the money, Dad," she insisted during one of her impromptu visits, during which she'd conveniently brought a notary public colleague along. "It's about making sure your wishes are respected if you become incapacitated. These documents just give me healthcare power of attorney, standard procedure at your stage of life." I'd been reviewing contracts and negotiating multi-million-dollar deals since before she was born, yet she spoke to me as if I couldn't understand basic legal concepts. I glanced through the documents, noting how broad the powers actually were, extending well beyond healthcare decisions. "I'll have my attorney review these," I said, placing them aside. A flash of annoyance crossed her face before she composed herself. "Dad, I am an attorney. A good one. You don't need to waste money having someone else review straightforward documents I've prepared." "Nevertheless," I replied mildly, "I'll have Gerald take a look." She left shortly afterward, leaving the documents on my desk with a sticky note attached. "Please sign ASAP, for your own protection." My youngest, Michael, was less calculating but equally troubling. At 38, he had yet to hold a steady job for more than a year, drifting between half-hearted entrepreneurial ventures that invariably failed. His latest scheme involved cryptocurrency trading, for which he needed just a small stake to get started, maybe 50,000. "It's not for me, Dad," he explained earnestly during one of his rare visits that always coincided with financial need. "It's for the family legacy. I'm thinking long-term here. Crypto is the future, and we're in the perfect position to get in on the ground floor of this new fund." "And what experience do you have with cryptocurrency trading?" I asked. He waved dismissively. "That's the beauty of it. This platform does all the work. The algorithms handle everything. It's basically guaranteed returns. Nothing in investing is guaranteed, a lesson I'd learned through decades of experience. The fact that he didn't understand this fundamental concept spoke volumes. These interactions, multiplying over months, painted a disturbing picture. My children weren't concerned about my welfare. They were circling like vultures waiting for their inheritance. The thought filled me with a cold, clarifying anger. Eleanor and I had raised them with every advantage. Private schools, college educations free from student loans, down payments for their first homes, lavish weddings. Yet somehow we'd failed to instill the values that mattered: integrity, work ethic, appreciation for what they'd been given. It was during a sleepless night, staring out at the moonlight reflecting off Lake St. Clair, that I made my decision. My children saw me as nothing more than a wallet, a means to their financial ends. Very well, I would give them exactly what they deserved. The next morning I called Gerald Hoffman, my attorney of 30 years, and one of the few people I still trusted implicitly. "Gerald," I said when he answered, "I need to make some changes to my estate planning." "Significant changes. Can you come to the house this afternoon?" There was a brief pause. Gerald knew me well enough to recognize when I was serious. "I'll clear my schedule. 3 o'clock? Perfect." When Gerald arrived, impeccable as always in his tailored suit, despite the summer heat, I led him to my home office overlooking the lake. As he settled into the leather chair across from me, I poured us each 2 fingers of the Macallan 25, I reserved for important occasions. "This must be serious," he commented, accepting the crystal tumbler. "You only bring out the good stuff when something significant is on your mind." I nodded, taking a seat behind my desk. "I want to change my will and restructure my assets, completely." Gerald raised an eyebrow but said nothing, waiting for me to continue. "My children think I'm a doddering old fool sitting on a pile of money they're entitled to inherit. They see me as a means to an end, not as a father." The words tasted bitter, but saying them aloud solidified my resolve. "I've decided to show them exactly how mistaken they are." "What did you have in mind?" Gerald asked carefully. I leaned forward. "I want to create the appearance that I've lost everything, that poor investments, declining mental capacity and financial mismanagement have wiped out my fortune." Both of Gerald's eyebrows rose now. "That's unusual, Howard, and potentially complicated. What's the end goal here?" "I want to see who my children really are when they think there's nothing to gain from me. I want to know if any of them would support their father if they believed he was destitute." Gerald swirled the amber liquid in his glass thoughtfully. "And the actual assets?" "Hidden. Restructured through a series of holding companies and trusts that can't be easily traced back to me. I want to maintain control of everything while creating a convincing illusion of financial ruin." "It can be done," Gerald said slowly. "But it would require significant restructuring, multiple layers of legal entities, perhaps some offshore components, and maintaining the deception would be challenging. I'm aware. I've given this considerable thought." I pulled a folder from my desk drawer and handed it to him. "Here's what I'm thinking." Gerald spent the next hour reviewing my preliminary plans, asking pointed questions, suggesting refinements. By the time we finished the Macallan, we had the outline of a strategy. "This is going to take time," Gerald warned, Probably 6 to 8 months to implement fully if we want to do it right. Create a paper trail that would withstand scrutiny from someone like Rebecca. Time is one thing I have, I replied. Do what needs to be done, spare no expense. As Gerald packed his briefcase, he paused. Howard, I have to ask, are you sure about this? It's an extreme step. I gazed out at the lake, at the horizon where water met sky. When Eleanor died, I lost my partner, my best friend. I've been alone these past 5 years. Gerald, really alone. My children visit when they want something, call when they need money. They've made it abundantly clear that my value to them is purely financial. I turned back to him. So yes, I'm sure. It's time they learned that actions have consequences. Over the next 7 months, Gerald and I executed the plan with meticulous attention to detail. We created a complex network of trusts, LLCs, and offshore entities. The bulk of my fortune, approximately $23 million, was transferred into these structures, with control mechanisms that allowed me continued access while obscuring ownership. We left a carefully constructed paper trail, suggesting a series of catastrophically bad investments, poorly secured loans to non-existent ventures, and mounting medical expenses not covered by insurance. By February, the stage was set. All that remained was to inform my children of my financial ruin. I chose to do it during our annual family dinner, typically held the week after Christmas, but delayed due to Thomas's ski vacation in Aspen. I selected a modest Italian restaurant in Grosse Pointe rather than the 5-star establishment downtown where we usually gathered. It was the first sign something was amiss, though none of my children commented on the change in venue when they arrived. Thomas came first, his perpetually tanned face drawn into a smile that didn't reach his eyes as he gave me a perfunctory hug. Rebecca arrived moments later, impeccably dressed in a designer suit, despite the supposedly casual family dinner. Michael was last, as usual, mumbling excuses about traffic while checking his phone. We ordered drinks, house wine rather than the expensive bottles I typically selected, another subtle sign that went unremarked, though I noticed Thomas eyeing his glass with barely concealed disdain. "So, Dad," Rebecca began after the waiter had taken our dinner orders, "how are you feeling lately? Any issues with your memory or concentration?" Direct as always, I suppressed a smile. "My mind is perfectly clear, thank you. In fact, that's part of why I wanted us to meet tonight. I have something important to discuss with all of you." That caught their attention. Thomas set down his subpar wine, suddenly alert. Rebecca straightened in her seat. Even Michael glanced up from his phone. "I've experienced some financial setbacks recently," I began, choosing my words carefully. "Significant ones." "What kind of setbacks?" Thomas asked, his voice sharp. I sighed, affecting a posture of defeat. "A series of investments that didn't pan out. Some questionable advice from financial advisors." I looked down as if embarrassed. "The truth is, I've lost almost everything." A stunned silence fell over the table. Rebecca recovered first. "What do you mean by almost everything?" "The business is essentially bankrupt. I've had to liquidate most of my personal investments to cover debts. The house—" I paused for effect. "Well, I'll be putting it on the market next week. I simply can't afford to maintain it anymore." Thomas's face had drained of color. "That's not possible. Walsh Properties was being the operative word," I interrupted. "Poor management after I stepped back from day-to-day operations, a few risky developments that failed spectacularly, and some legal issues I'd rather not get into." "Why didn't you tell us sooner?" Rebecca demanded, her attorney persona taking over. "We could have intervened, gotten better legal representation. It happened quickly," I lied. "And frankly, I was embarrassed. I've never failed at business before. It was difficult to accept, let alone share." "How bad is it exactly?" Thomas asked, his voice tight. "Numbers, Dad. I need to understand the scope." I pulled an envelope from my jacket pocket and placed it on the table. Gerald prepared this summary. "The bottom line is that after all debts are settled and the house is sold, I'll have approximately $300,000 remaining, enough to rent a modest apartment and live frugally for my remaining years, but nothing like the lifestyle we have been accustomed to." They stared at the envelope as if it might bite them. Finally, Rebecca snatched it up and tore it open, her eyes scanning the documents inside. Gerald had outdone himself. The financial statement appeared utterly legitimate, detailing a catastrophic collapse of my business empire and personal wealth. "This can't be right," she muttered, flipping through the pages. "These investment losses, who advised you on these?" Various people, I said vaguely. I take full responsibility. The decisions were ultimately mine. Michael, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, finally spoke. So, there's no inheritance? Nothing left for us? The nakedness of the question might have been shocking if I hadn't already known what motivated him. As it was, I simply nodded. I'm afraid not, Michael. In fact, I may need to rely on family support myself in the coming years. The color drained from all three of their faces simultaneously. It was almost comical, like a scene from a film where actors receive identical cues. Thomas's jaw clenched so hard, I could see a muscle twitching beneath his artificially tanned skin. Rebecca's perfectly manicured fingers crumpled the edge of Gerald's meticulously prepared financial statement. Michael looked as if someone had punched him in the stomach. Support? Thomas echoed, the word clearly foreign to his vocabulary when applied to his father. What kind of support? Nothing immediate, I assured them, watching their reactions carefully. The remaining funds should last a while if I'm careful. But eventually, well, I'm not getting any younger. Healthcare costs alone. There must be something that can be done, Rebecca interrupted, her legal mind already searching for loopholes, assets that might have been overlooked. Insurance policies, pension funds, something we haven't considered. Gerald has been very thorough, I said. We've explored every option. This is my new reality, and I thought you should know. You're my children, after all. My family. The word hung in the air between us, weighted with significance they clearly didn't feel. Our entrees arrived, breaking the tense silence momentarily. None of us had much appetite. I'll need to review these documents more carefully, Rebecca said finally, tucking the papers into her designer handbag. With all due respect to Gerald, a second legal opinion might be warranted. Of course, I nodded. I expected nothing less. And in the meantime, Thomas asked, what's your plan? As I said, I'll sell the house, find a small apartment perhaps in St. Clair Shores, scale back dramatically. Michael frowned. St. Clair Shores? But that's... He stopped himself, but the implication was clear. It wasn't the prestigious Grosse Pointe address they'd grown accustomed to. It's what I can afford, I said simply. I've already seen a few places. The rest of the dinner passed in uncomfortable conversation. My children picked at their food, exchanged meaningful glances, and made vague, non-committal statements about figuring something out and being there for me. Not one of them offered concrete assistance or genuine concern for my well-being. It was exactly as I had anticipated, yet the confirmation still stung. As we prepared to leave, Thomas pulled me aside. Dad, don't do anything hasty with the house. The market isn't great right now. Let me talk to some people. See if there are options we haven't considered. Translation. Let me see if there's any way to salvage my inheritance before you sell the primary asset. I nodded, playing the role of the grateful father. I appreciate that, Thomas, but I don't have much choice. The property taxes alone. Just give me a week, he insisted. Don't list it until we've had another conversation. All right, I agreed. 1 week. Rebecca was next, her expression composed but her eyes calculating. I'm going to have my associate review these documents first thing tomorrow. There may be grounds for legal action against whoever advised you on these investments. Gross negligence at minimum. Translation. I don't believe you're competent enough to have managed your own finances, and I'm looking for someone to sue to recover my lost inheritance. Thank you, dear, I said mildly, though I'm not sure there's much to be recovered. Michael simply gave me an awkward side hug, mumbling something about calling me tomorrow, before hurrying to his car, a luxury SUV I'd helped him purchase the previous year. I drove home to my lakeside mansion, satisfaction mixing with disappointment. The plan was working perfectly. My children had shown their true colors, exactly as I'd predicted. Yet part of me had hoped to be proven wrong, that at least one of them would show genuine concern beyond the financial implications, that one of them might have offered support without calculation. As I pulled into the circular driveway, the house loomed before me. 10,000 square feet of prime real estate that had never really felt like home since Eleanor died. Perhaps there was some truth in the lie I'd told. Perhaps it was time for a change, regardless of finances. I poured myself a glass of Macallan, the good stuff, not hidden away for this charade, and settled in my study to await the inevitable phone calls. They didn't disappoint. Thomas called first, barely an hour after dinner. Dad, I've been thinking about your situation, he began without preamble. I might have a solution that could benefit everyone. I'm listening, I said, swirling the whiskey in my glass. What if I bought the house from you? Not at market value, I couldn't afford that, but at a price that would give you more cushion than you currently have. Say, 2 million. You could still downsize, but to somewhere more appropriate than St. Clair Shores. By appropriate, he meant somewhere that wouldn't embarrass him when he told his country club friends where his father lived. And the offer was insultingly low. The property was worth at least twice that amount, even in a down market. That's generous of you to consider, Thomas, I said, keeping my voice neutral. But even if I accepted such an offer, the proceeds would primarily go to creditors. The business debts have priority claims. Right. Of course, he backpedaled. Just brainstorming options. Let me work on some numbers, see what might be feasible. Rebecca called next, her tone clipped and professional. Dad, I've started reviewing the documents, and something doesn't add up. These investment losses, they're incredibly unusual. Almost as if they were deliberately structured to fail. Clever girl. Always the sharpest of my children. I don't know what to tell you, Rebecca. I trusted the wrong people, made poor decisions. It happens, even to experienced businessmen. I think you're hiding something, she said bluntly. These numbers don't make sense for someone with your business acumen. Were you having cognitive issues you haven't disclosed? Memory problems? Judgment impairment? My mind is perfectly sound, I replied, an edge creeping into my voice, though I appreciate your concern. This isn't just concern, Dad. If you were experiencing cognitive decline and financial advisors took advantage of that fact, we have legal recourse. But I need you to be honest with me. Translation: I need a reason to explain how you could have lost my inheritance, preferably one that allows me to sue someone to get it back. I've been nothing but honest, Rebecca. The decisions were mine, ill-advised as they may have been. She sighed in frustration. I'm coming over tomorrow with my associate. We need to go through your records in detail. I'll be here, I said mildly. Michael didn't call that night or the next day, or the day after that. Of my 3 children, he was the only one who didn't immediately launch into recovery mode. Not out of consideration for my feelings, I suspected, but because he lacked the initiative or intelligence to formulate a plan. The next week was a parade of financial advisors, attorneys and real estate agents, all brought to my home by Thomas and Rebecca, in their desperate attempts to salvage something from the wreckage of my apparent financial ruin. I played my role perfectly, the once successful businessman now humbled by failure, resigned to his reduced circumstances, yet grateful for his children's help. Through it all, I watched them closely. Neither Thomas nor Rebecca expressed genuine concern for my emotional well-being or offered support that didn't directly serve their financial interests. Thomas's proposed solutions invariably involved him acquiring my remaining assets at bargain prices. Rebecca's legal maneuvering was transparently self-serving, focused on recovering funds rather than ensuring my comfort or security. Michael finally appeared on day 5, looking uncomfortable in the midst of the financial archaeology taking place in my home office. He pulled me aside, out to the lakeside patio, where we used to have family barbecues when the children were young. "Dad," he began awkwardly, "I'm sorry about all this." He gestured vaguely toward the house. "It must be really hard." For a moment I felt a flicker of hope. Was this genuine concern? "And I hate to bring this up now, with everything you're dealing with," he continued, "but I'm in a bit of a situation myself. That investment opportunity I mentioned, I kind of already committed some funds I don't actually have. I thought, well, I was counting on your help." The flicker extinguished. "Michael, I just told you I've lost almost everything. I'm selling my home to pay debts. How exactly do you think I could help you?" He had the grace to look embarrassed. I know, it's just, these guys aren't the kind of people you want to owe money to, you know? And I thought maybe you had something set aside, some emergency fund or something that Rebecca and Thomas don't know about." I stared at him, momentarily speechless. Even knowing what I did about my children's motivations, the naked self-interest still had the power to shock. "I'm afraid not," I said finally. "Every account, every asset has been reviewed by your sister and her team of lawyers. There's nothing hidden, nothing set aside." His face fell. "Right. Of course, I just thought—" "Never mind." He glanced back at the house. "I should probably go. I've got some calls to make, try to sort this out." He left without offering help, without asking if I needed anything, without so much as a backward glance. By the end of the second week, the initial frenzy had subsided. My children had accepted with varying degrees of resignation that my financial situation was as dire as I'd claimed. The house was listed for sale, my remaining assets catalogued and valued, my new, reduced circumstances reluctantly acknowledged. What followed was perhaps the most revealing phase of my experiment. As the reality of my financial ruin settled in, my children's true characters emerged with stark clarity. Thomas's visits became less frequent, his calls shorter and increasingly focused on practical matters rather than personal ones. Just checking in about the house listing, or wanted to let you know I spoke with my financial advisor about your situation. Never, how are you feeling? Or, is there anything you need? Rebecca's approach was more direct. During one of her increasingly rare visits, she laid out her expectations bluntly. Dad, I've done everything I can to salvage this situation, but the fact remains, there's nothing left to work with. Thomas, Michael and I have our own families, our own financial responsibilities. We can't be expected to support you indefinitely. I'm not asking for support, I replied mildly. Just family connection. She had the decency to look momentarily abashed before her professional mask returned. Of course, but you need to be realistic about the future. The proceeds from the house will give you a cushion, but eventually you'll need to consider more affordable living arrangements than even a small apartment. Perhaps a senior living facility with a financial aid program. A glorified nursing home, in other words, for the father who had paid for her Ivy League education, her lavish wedding, her first home. I'll keep that in mind, I said. Michael simply disappeared from my life. No calls, no visits. When I called him, he was always just heading into a meeting or dealing with an emergency. His excuses grew increasingly transparent until, eventually, he stopped bothering to answer my calls at all. The house sold more quickly than expected. A tech executive from California looking for a summer home on the lake, willing to pay the asking price without haggling. The closing was scheduled for March 15th, giving me 6 weeks to downsize and relocate. I found a modest but comfortable condominium in St. Clair Shores, as promised. 2 bedrooms, a small balcony overlooking a marina, walking distance to a few decent restaurants. Not the luxury I was accustomed to, but pleasant enough for the purposes of my charade. As moving day approached, I waited for offers of help from my children. Surely they would step up for this concrete task, if nothing else. But Thomas was swamped at work. Rebecca had a critical case going to trial, and Michael didn't bother to respond to my message at all. I hired movers, donated most of my furniture to charity, and supervised the packing of the few belongings I was taking to the condominium. Gerald stopped by on the final day, surveying the empty rooms with a raised eyebrow. "Committed to the bit, I see," he commented as we stood in the cavernous living room where family Christmases had once been celebrated. "Thoroughness is important," I replied. "If I'm going to test them, the test has to be convincing." Gerald nodded, though I could see concern in his eyes. "And after the test, what then?" It was a question I'd been asking myself with increasing frequency. What was the endgame here, to punish my children for their selfishness? To teach them a lesson? Or was there still some hope of redemption, of rebuilding what had been broken? "I don't know yet," I admitted. "I'm still gathering data. Just don't lose sight of what's important, Howard," he said gently. "Revenge is a poor substitute for family." His words stayed with me as I settled into the condominium, arranging the few cherished possessions I'd kept, Eleanor's favorite reading chair, the grandfather clock that had stood in our first apartment, family photographs from happier times. The space was more than adequate for a single man, yet it felt hollow, emptied not just of possessions but of purpose. 3 months passed with minimal contact from my children. Thomas called occasionally, brief conversations focused on my health and finances, rather than any genuine connection. Rebecca sent formal emails with links to senior services and financial assistance programs for the elderly. Michael remained a ghost. Then, on a warm June evening, the experiment took an unexpected turn. I was sitting on my small balcony, watching boats return to the marina as the sun set over the lake, when my phone rang. It was Thomas. "Dad," he said without preamble, his voice tight with an emotion I couldn't immediately identify. "Have you spoken to Rebecca today?" "No," I replied, setting down my glass of iced tea. "Why?" He hesitated. "She's found something about your finances." A chill ran through me, despite the summer warmth. "What do you mean?" "I don't know exactly. She called me, talking fast, something about offshore accounts and hidden assets. She's coming to your place tonight. I'm on my way too. I see, I said carefully. And why the urgency? Dad, she thinks you've been lying to us, that the whole financial ruin thing is some kind of test or manipulation. She's furious. Clever Rebecca. I'd known she was the most likely to uncover the truth, though I'd hoped the protections Gerald and I had put in place would hold longer. I see, I repeated. Well, I suppose I'll see you both soon. I hung up and immediately called Gerald, filling him in on the development. It was bound to happen eventually, he sighed. Rebecca's too smart and too persistent to be fooled indefinitely. The question is, what do you want to do now? I considered the options. I could maintain the deception, deny Rebecca's accusations, continue the charade, or I could reveal the truth, explain my motives, face the consequences of my elaborate test. I think it's time for the truth, I said finally. All of it. Want me to be there? Gerald offered. No, this is a family matter now, but thank you, old friend, for everything. I had just enough time to change into fresh clothes and pour myself a stiff drink before the doorbell rang. Rebecca stood in the hallway, her face flushed with anger, a laptop clutched under her arm. Thomas hovered behind her, his expression a mix of confusion and apprehension. Come in, I said calmly, stepping aside. Rebecca strode past me without a greeting, setting her laptop on the small dining table and opening it with sharp, angry movements. Thomas followed more slowly, giving me an awkward nod. Explain this, Rebecca demanded, turning the screen toward me. On the display was a complex diagram of financial entities, shell companies, trusts, offshore accounts, with lines connecting them in an intricate web. At the center was my name. Where did you get this? I asked, genuinely curious. The information was supposed to be buried deep, accessible only to Gerald and me. It doesn't matter, she snapped. What matters is that you've been lying to us for months, playing some sick game while we worried about your future, tried to help you adjust to reduced circumstances. Thomas moved closer, squinting at the screen. What am I looking at exactly? Dad's fortune, Rebecca said coldly. All $25 million of it, hidden away in a labyrinth of shell companies and trusts while he pretends to be destitute. Thomas's head snapped up, his eyes locking with mine. Is this true? I took a long sip of my whiskey, buying time to organize my thoughts. Then I gestured to the small living room. Perhaps we should sit down. This might take a while. Rebecca remained standing, her posture rigid with anger. I don't need to sit down. I need answers. Why would you do this? What kind of cruel experiment was this supposed to be? Please, Rebecca, I said quietly. Sit down. I'll explain everything. Something in my tone must have reached her, because she reluctantly took a seat on the edge of the sofa. Thomas sat beside her, looking shell-shocked. I settled into Eleanor's reading chair, the familiar contours offering a small comfort as I prepared to lay bare the truth. Yes, I still have my fortune, I began. It's not quite $25 million anymore. The restructuring was expensive, and I've made some legitimate donations, but the bulk of it remains carefully hidden away. Why? Thomas asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Why would you lie about something like that? Because I wanted to know who my children really were, I said simply. When your mother died, something changed in our family dynamic. Or perhaps it was always there, and I was too busy building my empire to notice. But suddenly it seemed that my only value to you was financial. You didn't visit because you wanted to spend time with your father. You visited because you wanted something, money, connections, future inheritance. Rebecca opened her mouth to protest, but I held up a hand. Let me finish, please. This isn't easy for me either. I took another sip of whiskey. I watched as you circled like vultures, Thomas, with his transparent requests for loans, Rebecca with her legal documents designed to give her control of my affairs, Michael with his endless schemes requiring investment. Not one of you showed genuine concern for my well-being, my happiness, my loneliness after losing Eleanor. That's not fair, Thomas objected, but his eyes slid away from mine as he spoke. Isn't it? When I announced my financial ruin, did any of you offer support that wasn't ultimately self-serving? Did any of you say, don't worry, Dad, we'll help you through this? Did any of you invite me to live with you, share your home, become part of your daily lives? Silence fell over the room, heavy with unspoken truths. And after the initial shock wore off, after you accepted that there was nothing left to inherit, what happened? You disappeared from my life. Thomas, your calls became shorter and less frequent. Rebecca, you treated me like a problem to be managed, rather than a father to be loved. And Michael, I shook my head. Michael couldn't even be bothered to maintain the pretense of caring once he realized there was nothing to gain. "You've been testing us," Rebecca said slowly, her attorney's mind processing the implications. "For months, playing a role, watching our reactions, judging us." "Yes, and we failed," Thomas added quietly. I looked at my eldest son, seeing for the first time a glimmer of genuine self-awareness in his expression. "Yes, you did," Rebecca's anger flared again. "You had no right to manipulate us, to lie to us, to what?" I interrupted. "To discover whether my children loved me for myself or for my money. I think a father has every right to know that." "So what happens now?" Thomas asked. "You've proven your point. We're terrible children who only cared about our inheritance. What's the end game here?" It was the same question Gerald had asked, the same one I'd been asking myself for months. What did I want to come from this elaborate deception? "That depends on you," I said finally. "I didn't do this solely to punish you, though I can't deny there was an element of that in my motivation. I did it because I wanted clarity, and perhaps because I hoped to be proven wrong." "And now that you haven't been?" Rebecca asked, her voice smaller than I'd heard it in years. "Now, we have a choice, all of us." I leaned forward, meeting each of their eyes in turn. "We can go our separate ways, you to your lives, me to mine, with the knowledge that our relationship was built on financial expectation rather than familial love, or we can try to rebuild something genuine from the ashes of what's been revealed." Silence fell again as they absorbed my words. Thomas stared at his hands, Rebecca at the financial diagram still displayed on her laptop. The anger had drained from her face, replaced by something more complex, shame, perhaps, or the dawning recognition of uncomfortable truths. "Does Michael know?" Thomas asked eventually. "No, you're the only ones I've told." Rebecca closed her laptop slowly. "He should be here for this conversation. It affects him too." I nodded, surprised and somewhat encouraged by her inclusive attitude. "You're right. Would you call him?" She pulled out her phone, stepping onto the balcony for privacy. Thomas and I sat in uncomfortable silence until she returned. "He's coming. He'll be here in about an hour." She resumed her seat, posture still rigid but less hostile. "In the meantime, I have questions, practical ones." Of course she did. Rebecca always retreated to practicality when emotions became too complicated. "Go ahead," I encouraged. "The condominium? Is it yours or are you actually renting?" "Purchased through one of the shell companies." "It's mine." "And the proceeds from the house sale?" "Transferred to an offshore account, then filtered back through various entities to maintain the appearance of dwindling resources." She nodded, processing the information. "Clever. Unnecessarily elaborate and deeply unethical, but clever." "Did anyone else know about this?" Thomas asked. "Besides Gerald, I assume." "No one. Gerald handled all the legal work personally, no associates involved. The financial restructuring was done through a firm in Switzerland that specializes in discretion. The financial statements you showed us, they looked completely legitimate." "They were legitimate. In a sense. The entities described existed. The transactions occurred. They just weren't what they appeared to be." Rebecca shook her head, a reluctant admiration in her expression despite her lingering anger. "I've been investigating for months. The paper trail was impeccable. I only uncovered the truth because of a chance connection. One of the Swiss bankers involved is married to a colleague of mine. Even then, it took weeks of digging. As I said, Gerald is very good at what he does." The conversation lapsed into silence again, each of us lost in our own thoughts. The sun had set completely now, the marina lights reflecting on the dark water beyond my balcony. I thought of Eleanor, wondering what she would make of all this. Would she have approved of my deception? Probably not. She had always been more forgiving of our children's flaws, more willing to see the best in them even when evidence suggested otherwise. Michael arrived 50 minutes later, looking confused and slightly irritated at the unexpected summons. His expression shifted to wariness when he saw all of us gathered in the small living room. "What's going on?" he asked, remaining standing near the door as if prepared for a quick escape. Rebecca said it was important. "It is," I confirmed. "Please, sit down." He did so reluctantly, perching on the arm of the sofa, furthest from his siblings. "Is this some kind of intervention? Because if it's about the money I borrowed from Thomas last month—" "It's not about that," Thomas interrupted. "It's about Dad." "What about him?" Michael glanced at me with the barest minimum of concern. Are you okay? I'm fine, I assured him. Better than fine, actually. I'm still a multimillionaire. Michael blinked, clearly not processing my words. What? Rebecca sighed. Dad's been lying to us. Michael, he never lost his fortune. This whole financial ruin scenario was an elaborate test to see how we'd react, whether we really cared about him or just his money. Michael's confusion gave way to disbelief, then anger. Are you serious? This was all some kind of sick game? Not a game, I corrected. A revelation. And based on your complete disappearance from my life once you realized there was nothing to gain financially, I'd say it was quite illuminating. His face flushed. That's not fair. I've been dealing with my own problems. Problems you expected me to solve with my money, I interjected. When that option disappeared, so did your interest in maintaining a relationship with your father. Michael looked to his siblings for support, but found none. Thomas was examining his designer watch with newfound self-consciousness, and Rebecca was staring out at the marina, her expression unreadable. So now what? Michael asked, echoing his brother's earlier question. You've made your point. We're terrible children. Congratulations. That's not what I want, I said quietly. What I want, what I've always wanted, is a genuine relationship with my children, one based on mutual respect and affection, not financial expectation. And you thought the best way to achieve that was through deception? Rebecca asked, turning back from the view. I thought the only way to know the truth was to remove the financial incentive and see what remained, I corrected. And now we know. The four of us sat in silence, the weight of revealed truths pressing down on us. Outside, a boat's engine rumbled in the marina, the sound carrying across the still water. Finally, Thomas spoke, his voice subdued. I don't think any of us can deny that we failed your test, Dad. We've been self-interested at best, mercenary at worst. He looked up, meeting my gaze directly. But I'd like the chance to do better. I studied my eldest son, searching for sincerity beneath the polished exterior. Why? Because... He paused, struggling to articulate feelings that had long been suppressed beneath ambition and entitlement. Because you're my father, and because I don't like the person I see in the mirror right now. It wasn't a declaration of unconditional love, but it was honest. Perhaps honesty was the place to start. Rebecca nodded slowly. I've been focused on the legal and financial aspects of this situation because that's where I'm comfortable. It's easier than confronting the emotional truths you've forced us to face. She met my eyes, her expression vulnerable in a way I hadn't seen since she was a child. I don't know how to fix this, Dad, but I'd like to try. Michael remained silent, arms crossed defensively over his chest. Michael, I prompted gently. He shrugged, avoiding my gaze. What do you want me to say? That I'm sorry for expecting my multimillionaire father to help me when I needed it. That I should have visited more out of the goodness of my heart, when you've never shown any real interest in my life unless it was to criticize my choices. His words stung, partly because there was truth in them. I had been an absent father in many ways, focused on building my empire rather than nurturing my family. Perhaps this estrangement wasn't entirely one-sided. You're right, I acknowledged, surprising him enough that he finally looked at me. I haven't been the father you deserved. Any of you, I added, glancing at Thomas and Rebecca. I was so focused on providing financially that I neglected the emotional aspects of parenthood. That's on me, and I'm sorry. The admission hung in the air between us, a first step toward something new. So where do we go from here? Thomas asked after a moment. Forward, I hope, I said, with honesty on all sides. No more tests from me, no more financial expectations from you. Just family trying to find their way back to each other. It wasn't a fairy tale resolution. There were no tearful embraces, no instant healing of decades of dysfunction. But as we talked into the night, really talked, perhaps for the first time in years, I felt something shift, a door opening to possibilities I had almost given up on. Thomas spoke of the pressure he'd always felt to live up to my success, the constant fear of disappointing me that had driven him to project an image of prosperity, even when he was struggling. Rebecca admitted that her legal focus had been a shield, a way to maintain control in a family where emotions were rarely expressed directly. And Michael, reluctantly at first but with increasing candor, talked about feeling like the family failure, always measuring himself against his high-achieving siblings and coming up short. I shared, too, about my grief after losing Eleanor, my fear of irrelevance as I aged, my regret for the time I'd spent building wealth instead of memories with my family. It wasn't easy, this new honesty between us, but it felt necessary, cleansing. As dawn broke over the marina, casting long shadows across my small living room, we were exhausted but somehow lighter. The anger and shock had given way to something more complex, a tentative hope, perhaps, that something valuable might be salvaged from the wreckage of our previous relationships. "I should get home," Rebecca said eventually, gathering her laptop. "David will be wondering where I am." "Me too," Thomas agreed, standing and stretching. "Karen has an early meeting. She'll need me to get the kids to school." Michael nodded. "Yeah, I should go too." They headed for the door, then paused, an awkward moment, as none of us quite knew how to end this unprecedented conversation. "Sunday dinner," I said suddenly. "Here, nothing fancy, just family dinner. Would you come?" They exchanged glances, a silent communication passing between them. "I'll be here," Thomas said finally. "Me too," Rebecca added. Michael hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah, okay. Sunday dinner." It wasn't forgiveness, exactly. It wasn't an erasure of the hurt on either side. But it was a beginning, a small step toward rebuilding what had been broken. After they left, I stood on my balcony watching the sun rise over the marina. The boats gleamed in the early light, their reflections rippling on the gentle waves. In the distance, I could see the shoreline of the lake where my former home stood, its grandeur now belonging to someone else. I didn't regret the deception exactly. It had revealed necessary truths, forced a confrontation that might otherwise have been avoided indefinitely. But I recognized the cost of such harsh illumination, the trust that would need to be rebuilt, the wounds that would take time to heal. Gerald's words echoed in my mind. Revenge is a poor substitute for family. It hadn't been revenge I was after. Not really. It had been truth, clarity, the stripping away of pretense to see what remained when the financial incentives were removed. What remained, it seemed, was flawed but genuine. 3 imperfect children and their equally imperfect father, finally seeing each other clearly, and choosing, despite everything, to try again. I thought of the fortune still hidden away in its labyrinth of legal entities, the money that had once seemed so important, the empire I'd spent a lifetime building. It still mattered, of course, security always matters, but its significance had shifted, its place in my hierarchy of values rearranged. Sunday dinner came, and to my surprise, all 3 of my children arrived. Thomas with a bottle of wine that wasn't attempting to impress anyone, Rebecca with a homemade dessert rather than a store-bought one, Michael on time and fully present, rather than distracted by his phone. The conversation was sometimes awkward, occasionally tense, but consistently honest. We were learning how to be a family without the distortion of financial expectations, discovering who we were to each other when money was removed from the equation. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't even close. But as we sat around my modest dining table in the condominium that was a fraction of the size of my former home, I felt something I hadn't experienced since Eleanor died, the sense of being truly seen and valued for who I was, not what I could provide. The fortune I'd hidden would eventually be revealed officially, the legal structures unwound, proper estate planning put in place, but that was for another day. For now, this newfound honesty, this tentative rebuilding of family bonds was wealth enough. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left.